Thank you very much. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Dr. Rich, for joining me again. As we discussed, we're going to talk about 2 or 3 things today. We'll try to cover them. The first one was I'm going to share the screen. I hope this time the screen share works. Something that me and Jerry discussed earlier. This news came out. Let me know when you see this news.
Oh, yes.
So this came out a month ago. France is deciding to part ways and trying to ditch Microsoft Teams and Zoom and some other American-made digital, apps, citing sovereignty concerns or surveillance concerns. So apparently some of the meetings have been monitored or recorded by someone. So they're trying to develop in-house tools and apps. So this is something that we discussed briefly last time as well, that there will be 2 ecosystems of technology now. One that China has, all the technology in terms of search engine and WeChat payment systems, and then what America has, Google, and then Microsoft and OpenAI. China has DeepSeek. So this is becoming an increasing trend now, that the world might be divided into 2 extremes in terms of technology. And it's interesting because France still considers itself an ally of America, but it's trying to part ways from all these digital platforms. It is also trying to come up with its own large language model and trying to not use OpenAI too much. So what do you make of this shift in today's climate, I guess?
Jeff, go first.
Okay. It's really interesting, and I do think we're seeing examples of this across the board. There's the France thing with, I think maybe there were concerns around WhatsApp and stuff like that, but they're also taking other decisions around, I guess, digital sovereignty. I believe they're investing heavily in some kind of quantum computer system. They're also looking at introducing, laws similar to Australia's on, underage social media use kind of thing. And other countries are doing it too. I mean, there's generally a conflict, I guess, between the United States, big tech, and the EU over a whole range of things in terms of, free speech, i.e., big tech gets to do whatever it wants, but also over the regulation of AI and things like that. I think Russia's similarly looking to sort of push out WhatsApp and those kind of messaging services as well, given sort of security issues. And even within the United States itself, I was just listening to a story this morning about a conflict between Anthropic, the people who own the Claude AI systems, and the United States, because basically the Pentagon wants to have unrestricted use of that AI system to weaponize it in whatever way they choose, and the company is saying, maybe we want to have a few safeguards, and it's got to the point where the US Secretary of War has threatened to basically take over the company under the sort of Defence Production Act in the United States. So there are all these disputes occurring, but I don't think around the world around, I guess, technological security, both with apps, but also with AI and, with more deeper sort of infrastructure. I don't think it's necessarily sort of bifurcating in a simple way, because, you can see those conflicts between EU and the United States over technology control and digital media and AI as well. I think it's perhaps more a case of the United States, which at some level dominates in big tech, wanting to be unilateral or on these issues, as with every other issue, and then encountering resistance from many, many countries, EU. There's a similar thing going on in India, a dispute around content rules with the big tech companies as well. So I think it's because it's such a big and crucial thing that is also being sort of weaponized to some degree within both information warfare, but also a serious military way as well. It's becoming a very crucial area, and I think governments around the world are acting within their own sort of frameworks to start to bring some of particularly the American big tech companies under control. So, I mean, that's kind of where I'd say. I'm interested in what your view would be, Jerry.
I've got a slight add-on to that. I think I agree with everything you just said. Definitely, it's not a bipolar issue. It's not China versus the West. It's America versus the rest. It's a unipolar issue. And we are seeing it. TikTok is banned in India, for example. TikTok is banned in Hong Kong, which has a free area. So because they say Hong Kong is China, which it's nice that they're recognizing that, but then they're saying, no, it's not. It's not really. So there's those issues. It is not just a China versus America thing. The other thing is much more societal. I see it as much more societal. I had a question today in my YouTube comments just before I came online. I just scanned through my comments, respond to a few. And one of them is, are you bombarded with adverts in China? And this is one aspect of it. We are not bombarded with adverts, but we do get a lot of adverts. So there's a lot of financial incentive to keep people on your platform because that's where you make money. But then one thing that's different between China and the West is what Warwick Powell calls the rentier society. We're renting everything. We're not buying anything anymore. We don't control anything anymore. In the old days, our parents, when we were younger, would go out and we'd buy something, and that becomes ours for the rest of our lives. What's happening now is we're buying a monthly stake in this thing, and I don't use Microsoft Office anymore. I use LibreOffice because it's free and it's designed by the same people a long, long time ago. I don't use any of I use Yahoo for my email because I've had the same email for many, many years, but I can't send a large file on Yahoo because I have to pay more I have to pay to use it. Now, Yahoo is free, but only up to, I think it's 50 megabytes. So send a couple of photographs and you can't use Yahoo anymore. So then they want you to subscribe to something else, which will allow you to send this bigger thing. You get free use of certain platforms, my Canva to make my thumbnails, and you're very, very limited on what is free. Then you have to pay a little bit more. Even things like X, I cannot secure. I have 2 X channels. I lost one just a month ago to a hacker. It's still operating, but the hacker has somehow managed to change the name on it, and it still has my 30,000 followers. They're gone from me. The hacker is now, Angela Langhorne, is now using this for a science. It's my channel, but it's gone. And all of and I noticed it's actually still growing. So I checked on it just yesterday. It's still growing. Now, the reason I lost that is because I can't use dual authentication on X unless I subscribe to X or subscribe to one of these 2 platforms that allows me dual authentication. So everything now is costing money, and it's not in China. I have a QQ account. I have a WeChat account. I have several different Chinese apps that I use, and they're free. They don't charge me anything. My global positioning is not GPS. It's AMAP, which comes from Beidou. And they are not charging me a cent. So I get on my bike and I put my location of somewhere that I want to ride to, which could be 100 kilometers away, and it's completely free. I do pay for data, it's a phone system, but I'm using a system that is free, whereas in the West, I'd be using a system that I'm subscribed to. Everything is subscribe here, rent this from us. And that's the problem that I see in the West. You have, and it happened particularly during COVID, you have a very small group of people who own the platforms that we are forced to use because they've monopolized them. And then during COVID, many of these people went from having just a few billion to tens or hundreds of billions. Now, I don't know how much money you need to have, but if you've got a billion already, I don't think you need any more from me. So as far as I'm concerned, I will not subscribe to any of those things. I think that's a huge problem that the West needs to overcome, but cannot, particularly America cannot, because we saw who was at the inauguration. It was all of these people who were making billions. We're going to see our first trillionaire fairly soon. You know, we've got Jeff Bezos and we've got Elon Musk and we've got Zuckerberg, and these are the guys who are making. They've remodeled the internet effectively and said,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is great. We can make money out of this." And not only can we make money out of this, we'll just charge them a couple of dollars. So no one's going to complain about $5 or $8 or $6. But when you've got 1 million people doing that every month, then you've got a lot of money. When you've got 50 million people doing that, you've got an obscene amount of money that nobody should have. That's the socialist in me coming out there. Nobody should have that much money. That's the way I see internet going. European Union is doing its best to stop that. India is doing its best to stop that. China has already stopped it. But in the US, I think the stable door is wide open and all the horses have bolted. You're not going to change it.
It's interesting, Jerry, because in the 1990s, to go down memory lane here a bit,
I was there.
I was working in the Victorian government, basically in, when the World Wide Web and all that sort of stuff, sort of digital media, the online world was very sort of new. And the Victorian government was, pretty cutting edge, I guess, internationally in terms of spotting that early, and it set up a sort of an agency which was called Multimedia Victoria to deal with it. And that I sort of worked in that agency and dealt with some of these sort of early sort of internet regulation issues. And in the the 80s, 90s, there was a lot of utopian thinking, I guess, about the internet, about information society, all that sort of stuff, and a lot of effort from governments around the world to try to see socially equitable development of the internet. So, all sorts of things that were done. But as you say, it's largely developed along this sort of American rentier economy type model. You pay a license for everything, and it's all about advertising space and all this sort of stuff. And in the 1990s, it was period of peak American dominance in the world. So it was perhaps a unfortunate geopolitical coincidence that this huge technological development happened at a time of, great power imbalance. And I guess the big technological developments that are having a similar, perhaps even greater transformative effect now are occurring in a very different context, which I wonder whether it will actually lead to a different outcome, a more equitable outcome. So, as you say, I mean, we've named India, China, Russia, and Europe all played an active role in trying to moderate this sort of overly privatized sort of model of the internet or of technology development that operates in the United States. And the United Nations has just set up a special, what's called independent scientific panel on AI as well, and is planning to have a big conference in June. So I wonder if some of those initiatives will actually curtail some of that development, and perhaps because of the world in which this transformation is occurring is so much more equitably balanced than it was in the 1990s, it will actually lead to a different kind of development of some of these technologies.
I think
That's true. UK had a big meeting about 18 months, 2 years ago, where they brought in all of the experts in AI, and they got criticized very heavily for bringing China in to this one. And China is actually way out in front now in some respects. Even the experts are saying, we're no longer in a competition with China. They've overtaken us. I don't know very much about this, but China has set up a legal framework by which AI can expand. And that's a framework that the UK doesn't yet have. It's a framework the European Union doesn't yet have. And it looks to me like China is going down this track in the right way, so that we're going to be, I hope, we're going to be much safer online in China than we will be online in the West. And sometimes I'm really, really grateful for this great firewall that protects us inside of China. It doesn't keep people out. And anyone can come in and look through any platform in China. Now, if anything, some people outside of China, particularly in Australia, and I know that Ali will have experienced this, where he and I will talk about something and I'll send him a link, so I can't open it. He can't open a Chinese link inside of Australia. So it's not China blocking that. There's a problem there. China is not blocking this link because I'm sitting in America on my VPN watching this. Now, I'm sitting in China physically, but my VPN says I'm in America and I'm reading this. If I go to Australia, I can't open it. So every accusation is a confession of some sort, or every confession is an accusation sometimes. But the truth is we're going through this period of time where it does seem in some respects to be uncontrollable, except in places like perhaps India, perhaps Russia, the authoritarian places. And there's no way India can be described as a true democracy. It's much more authoritarian than Westminster would be. So there's a lot of things going on where you have this
I'd
kind
call
of
India a true democracy, but that's okay. I mean, I think it's a very impressive democracy.
It's okay. I guess it depends on the terminology of democracy. In terms of representational, it's a very different place. But yeah, it depends on that definition. But it's where you've got powerful leaders in powerful positions where you can have this thing done properly, and where you have weak leaders who are paid for by those donors, you will never ever get the restrictions and regulations that you want. Literally, you've got donors writing policy or including their favored policy into laws that are being written, and that's already happening. They call it lobbying.
Yeah, well, it'll be really interesting to see how it develops. But in a way, also the age ban or age limit sort of thing in Australia will be interesting as well. And the fact that because Australia over the last 10 or 20 or 10 or 15 years has actually been quite activist from its sort of competition regulators and other sort of government agencies in to some degree sort of trying to control the power of digital media and the big tech firms. And it's had major disputes and arguments with those firms. There was, the huge contretemps with Facebook at some point. And
we actually had an entire department that protected our interests against the ACCC, or the TPC as it was back then. One of my friends was the head of a department that dealt with them on a daily basis for exactly that reason. Australia does have that. Yeah,
so I can't remember all the specific things, but it has played that role. So there's clearly, there's scope to do it. So I really think this sort of UN initiative will be quite interesting in terms of, because I think there's 40 countries around. China's involved, the US is involved, but and there's also an Australian representative on the, an Australian expert on the panel.
Good.
Chinese Australian expert on the panel, And so it'll be quite interesting, I think, to see how that develops and how this issue shapes up, because it's also connecting to this whole discussion about, if I can use this word on your podcast, Ali, of the enshittification of the internet. I can't remember the guy's name who talks about this, but he's like a long-term, sort of American libertarian, internet libertarian type. But there is a kind of a social response. You're saying it's important to frame this issue in social terms, not merely technological terms. I mean, people are getting sick of, personally, I'm so sick of being pumped full of, get on to AI, all those sort of people over 40 need to learn how to use AI, sort of. Be the most dangerous man in the room or something like that, or all those ads that you constantly get on YouTube in particular at the moment, it seems.
I'm not getting those ads in China.
Oh, well, there you go.
No, because YouTube is...
I do get them when I'm on YouTube and X quite a lot, so I do get to see a lot of this stuff. But I can actually get a little bit of desalination from it, if that's the right word.
But I guess I sense people are sort of turning off a bit. Like they're sort of saying, "Oh, this," and it's all a bit disappointing, and the AI slop debate, or all that sort of thing. Anyhow.
I think what France has done, going back to the original question, I think what France has done is probably the right thing to do, because we know for a fact every keystroke can be monitored. Not can be, is monitored. Every keystroke we use, every word that we say, even here, we're on a platform which is a Western managed platform that Ali subscribes to. Sometimes we chat on my platform, which is one that I subscribe, again, Western managed. And everything that we do is stored. Where is it stored? It's certainly not stored inside of my computer, what can be, but it's being stored in some cloud somewhere that belongs to someone else. And eventually we'll run out of space on the storage, and I've got 50 hours of storage, so I'm either deleting or paying for more. It's just the way that it's going. It's becoming to a point where I have a credit card and I use it for I have one subscription that I need to have. I hate having it. I hate the fact that I have to have it, but I have one subscription, and it's a US-based subscription, and I'm paying in US dollars every month on my credit card. So I can't change that. And I have no choice but to have that. And in fact, so it's two subscriptions. One is my VPN, and one is the app that we're using now, or the channel I use to talk to my friends and my guests. So there's a big problem that we just don't have a choice of entering these things, and I'd be happy when the world gets some kind of balance on it. And France needs to do it. China has done it. There's rumors that China won't allow Apple phones into government offices. That's not true. There's rumors that they won't allow Teslas to park in government car parks. That's not true either. All of these rumors that you hear, these accusations, they're there because of a reason. They're there because people in the West are saying, well, we're going to put something into this phone, or we're going to put something into this car that we can use. And then they accuse China of being oversensitive. No, in fact, China was the first country to ban minors. Or not ban, they limited minors. We were the first country to do that. And my sister-in-law, who has a now 15-year-old, who was 11 or so at the time it happened, she was over the moon about this. That'll get him off his platform. And I've tried many times. She didn't know how to get him off. And now, of course, he still uses his computer systems and his devices, but he's not online talking to his mates all the time, which is what he was doing. So he gets an hour a day at 8 or 9 p.m. I think it is, and that's it. Before bed, he can go online.
So that phrase, Dr. Rich, Cory Doctorow, that's the name of the person. So he's written a book as well. And then the reason I got up was I wanted to look at these two books. I mean, one is Age of Surveillance Capital.
Shoshana Zuboff.
So Shoshana Zuboff. So this is exactly what you two guys have been talking about, how personal data is being monitored, and then it's been capitalized. So there's a very good story of how Alphabet or Google started in this book. And they were really excited that now they can monitor people's habits and then push ads on to them later on. And that's exactly what's happened. And then this one, Technofeudalism by Yanis Varoufakis.
Yanis.
Yeah, so he also talks about the same thing, but he goes a bit further. He says that all these digital medias are being used to shape public narrative and push a certain sort of narrative to public and to control them as well. So Technofeudalism, these two books are really, really good and relevant. Just on the surveillance thing, I'll just share something else. We were talking about security concerns. So this came out a few months ago. I'm not sure if you can see that.
Yeah.
Me and Jerry discussed that. So IDF is swaying away from Chinese electric cars, saying that they might be used for surveillance. But then China recently announced that it's going to stop using US and Israeli cybersecurity softwares also, because China suspects they might be spying on China. So I guess everybody's trying to spy on everyone.
There's any might about this.
Sorry?
I don't think there's any might about this. I think both Israel and the USA have quite blatantly said this is what they do. Israel were very proud of the fact that there's hardly a device out there that doesn't have an Israeli app or Israeli software thing on it, which allows them to do this. So I don't think there's any issues about that at all. I mean, I'm using a Vivo Chinese phone, and I have been doing since my Huawei was stolen from me. This is several years ago. I lost a phone in a public toilet and never found it again. So it was a Huawei before that. I haven't used an Apple or I try not to use any American products at all if I can help it, because I know that they're grossly expensive. So the cost of them is not the issue. It's the security. WeChat is quite secure. And WhatsApp is not. WhatsApp can be accessed if they want to access it, and WeChat can't. So there's an issue that, as far as I know, it can't anyway. I mean, I may be wrong in that.
Everything is being accessed, Sherry. Everything. I mean, privacy went out of the door 10 years ago. I think in 2015, 2016, I think, everything that you do, the government knows, and people who need to know, they know. So there's no privacy. Yeah. That's the thing. But I guess everybody's spying on everyone now in this world. So
but I'm still not sure of the veracity of that story, because we've had these stories before. China tells its government officials you can't buy a Tesla. Not true. I know many people work for the government who have Teslas. I had coffee with one yesterday, and she's got a Tesla and she works for the government. There's a lot of things like this that they're saying. They're just not true. So there may be certain people. There is a factor actually where in China now, particularly government officials are not really supposed to be ostentatious. Now, if you can afford a Tesla, there's nothing wrong with buying a Tesla. But if you can't afford a Tesla, you can get an equally as good car for 30-40% less than the cost of a Tesla in China now. So you can get yourself an Xpeng or top of the range BYD. They're every bit as good as a Tesla, and they do the same thing with the same ranges, and you have the same features. Some of them have more features than the Tesla. But the fact is, Tesla is a nice car. It's a good car. I've been in a few of them. They're good. But some people are saying, well, why buy a Tesla when you don't need to? And I think there's a lot of that going on, and a lot of people in the West are reading into this a little bit too much. China hasn't said you can't have a Tesla because we're worried about security. China said, why would you buy a Tesla when we have better Chinese cars, as good Chinese cars, and not an American car? And there is definitely this nationalism that's going on inside of China right now, and it's going on at the highest level as well. We lost a few people at the beginning of this year who have American one foot in America. So people at the head of Tsinghua University was stood down. He has a wife who lives in America, has taken up American, either green card or residence of some sort. And if he's going to have that, he can't really be head of a Chinese institution. So we've got those kinds of nationalism issues going on. They're definitely there. But I'm still not entirely certain about the veracity of all these stories we hear where China says, you can't do this. And then I know people who are doing that. So it's very different to the reality. Whatever the paperwork says, the reality is very different.
But, Dr. Rich, you go and sorry.
Oh, I mean, just briefly, I mean, I guess my only qualification about the sort of surveillance state type things, I mean, I guess, yes, there is the technological capacity to monitor our phone calls and all that sort of stuff. On the same side, we also willingly live our lives, out in the sort of in digital space, the internet world, so much more, social media and so people do make these sort of trade-offs, etc. I mean, I don't think states actually have the capacity to, monitor everything that people are looking at. There's that constant meme in the thrillers and on TV and stuff like that about picking up the words in the phone calls, and that may be the case, but I guess how much the reality of it actually impinges on your life is another thing, and maybe that's also a way of evaluating these stories about there might be some technological capability for Chinese electric vehicles to, transport all the information back to the intelligence centers in Beijing. But, don't they have other more important things to worry about than, who's driving where in Sao Paulo?
That's also true, yeah.
I think
People talk about that with the surveillance, and I know that China does have a hell of a lot of cameras. A lot of the cameras are automated. They're there for traffic control. They are there for crime control as well. But nobody's watching all of these cameras. Big Brother is watching you, but nobody's actually watching. And if you go to somewhere, it's only happened to me once or twice where I've gone somewhere and said, I need to see your camera because something has happened. And it's not working. There's that issue as well. But the fact is, they are used. There's no question about it. Crime is virtually non-existent. Street crime is virtually non-existent in China. It's an orderly society, but they are used, and they are used retrospectively. It's not a case of someone is out there watching you and you're going to get pinged for doing something wrong. Yes, you will get pinged for speeding, the same as you will anywhere else in the world. You might get pinged for jaywalking, although I've never heard of that. I've only heard that in Western media. What they do sometimes is they put your picture up on a big screen when you run across the road when you shouldn't, and you don't get a penalty for this. You get shamed. You don't even get named. You get shamed. You look at this person in the red dress running across the road, and there's a woman with the red dress going, I've been seen. And it's embarrassing. Yeah, that's pretty much all it is. I often say that people in China, the police, the authorities in China, they manage our behavior, and the authorities in the West profit from our misbehavior. It's a very different way of looking at it, and I think that's very much how China is.
I mean, in the West, we manage the whole nudge units, and it was very, they probably reached their peak of influence during the pandemic, etc. So, the conscious manipulation of sort of social environments, social infrastructure or whatever to achieve certain outcomes, that absolutely happens in the West as well. So,
I guess the country...
Every accusation is a confession.
Well, but it's also, in a way, at some level, that's also just a function of government to to shape the social environment to achieve certain collective outcomes as well.
Yeah.
So it can be presented as the sort of evil, cunning plan of totalitarian elites, or it can just be accepted. Well, how do we avoid a tragedy of the commons? How do we avoid everyone dumping their rubbish in the street? I remember reading at some point that someone in New York had the extraordinary, amazing idea that they could reduce the sort of rat infestation problem in New York by actually getting people to put their rubbish in, bins with top, caps on them rather than just free floating bags on the street. And, they came up with this idea in 2024. I mean, really?
Wow.
I think just
it worked.
I think just building on surveillance. So if you go to Saudi Arabia or UAE or Israel or Bahrain, Qatar, one of the most heavily surveilled countries, and they do have armies of people monitoring their security cameras, armies of people. That's how they suppress all the resistance and all that kind of stuff. So it does go on, and they all communicate with each other, trying to understand how Israel is surveilling its own citizens and Palestinians, how Saudi Arabia is surveilling its own citizens, and then they exchange notes and all that kind of stuff. So it does go on. It does go on. I guess.
Oh, and we've had all the Palantir stuff about flagging people for comments and things like that. So I'm not denying that, but I guess it's sort of like trying to. Are they very targeted applications in certain situations against certain people, or are we living under like a universal sort of surveillance state? Yeah, and those sorts of things have operated with less advanced technologies in East Germany and the former Soviet Europe, etc. There were certainly very extensive systems of non-technological surveillance of people. So it's absolutely a concern, but I just wonder whether sometimes people are mistaking the capability with the intention of the system, sort of thing.
So it does. So this Chinese embassy that might be built in London. So this is where it all. Some of it goes to as well, surveillance, spying, all that kind of stuff. So there might be a genuine concern by British citizens that Chinese embassy will spy on them. Obviously, Chinese are one of the most technologically advanced people, I guess. So once you start seeing all these reports, I mean, you see, okay, might be propaganda, but after 1 or 2 years, they might converge to a single point or single narrative like they always do. And I also heard a couple of weeks ago that the neighbors where the Chinese embassy would be built, they are trying to lodge a complaint, I guess, with the local council or whoever it is, say that it shouldn't be built right next to their property, stuff like that. So there is a concern, and it can be done. I mean, spying can be done, but I think everybody's spying on everyone. So how do what's the outcome? I mean, people will keep spying on everyone. So
I think it's too late. It's too late to change that. We have to be realistic. The ability is there. No matter how much we might not want this, it's already too late to stop it being in our society. The way I would view this, if they're building an embassy next door to me and I lived in London, is what a boring life if they're going to be monitoring me. Most of us live very boring lives. 99% of us. The TV series Big Brother showed us all how boring our lives were. We sit around all day doing nothing, and someone made entertainment out of this. People in the Chinese embassy are not going to be sitting there watching what their neighbors are doing. They're not interested in that. They're very interested perhaps in what the military might be doing and what the the Air Force is planning and what the intelligence departments are doing, but they don't care about what the daily person this is. This is where it gets a little confusing for me. You get so many people saying, "Oh, I don't want a surveillance state." Well, why not? The surveillance state that I live under here in China is extremely safe. I'm not doing anything wrong. If I do something wrong, I'll almost certainly get caught. So I won't do anything wrong. Is there such a bad thing about that? Yeah, you can argue that, oh, yeah, they've taken your civil liberties away. Well, they haven't. They've made me very safe. They've made the environment that I live in, the environment my wife lives in, the environment my in-laws and my nieces and nephews live in, very, very safe for us to live here. People leave stuff lying around. A good example, yesterday I heard a story. Someone left a bag in one of these tourist destinations. 3 hours later, realized, oh my God, I put my bag down. Went back, the bag is still there. Inside of the bag was credit cards and money and a couple of other things that were valuable to them, ID cards. The bag was still there 3 hours later. Nobody touched it. Why would anyone touch it? Because it's under surveillance. It might be a trap. So I don't feel that this is a bad thing. I understand the civil libertarians' concerns that the worse the system gets, the more they have control over me. But I trust the government. And that's really what it boils down to. So far, I have no reason not to trust the government under which I live, which is Chinese government. And I don't trust the British government so much. And I did live under the British government's authoritarian state. I was actually part of it. And we did have the ability to do things that they say China will do. But I've never experienced China doing these things.
And I mean, there are also significant, protections, I guess, that are embedded in certainly the Australian system. I'm assuming most Western systems as well. I mean, like the classic case is like health records. Like, I've had some direct involvement in some of this, these sort of issues in government, etc. So, generally both the legislation and the enforcement of the legislation and all the systems around it, if you think, protecting your personal health information is extremely good, and that's the most sensitive thing. And, even in very critical and highly sensitive things like, people with mental illness and stuff like that, that is pretty systematically protected, and in totalitarian types, I don't particularly like that term, totalitarian systems, but, in your archetypal model of a totalitarian system, your personal health information is not particularly well protected. So
I disagree with. I know that that's the allegation that's often made, but in China, there's very, very strong data protection laws. Very strong.
I wasn't particularly thinking of China there. I mean, I was thinking more sort of Stalinist Russia kind of thing, or Stalinist Soviet Union. So it wasn't particularly common around China. But just to say, basically you can pretty much go about your life in Australia, at least, pretty confident that your personal health information is not either going to be used commercially or sort of leaked out or sort of dribble, doctors spreading rumours about you or government officials ringing up and saying, is this person we're having trouble with, have they had a mental health episode in the past 20 years or so, so we can discredit them in some way, that sort of thing. So you don't really have that experience. And it's one of those sort of invisible assumptions, I guess, that people often forget about, but is actually pretty fundamental to people sort of going about and enjoying their lives.
Okay, let's move on to Quad then. We didn't discuss it last time. So Quad, I think it started in 2007, and probably the purpose of it was to counter the rise of China. But then China is rising and rising and rising, so it didn't really do what it intended to do. So is there any benefit in just continuing Quad right now?
Do you want to go first this time, Jerry?
I honestly, I don't see any benefit I mean, I do see benefit in shared information, shared intelligence, but I don't see any benefit in sharing intelligence with the United States, which historically will not share its intelligence with others. We talked a little while ago about the memes and the fiction, but the fiction comes from the fact, the truth. We know that there are whistleblowers out there who tell us this. America knew that this was happening and didn't tell anybody. America had intelligence about this and didn't do anything about it. We know that this has happened in facts. So sharing with a country that is only prepared to share one way, to me, seems like it's not a very good idea. I don't see the benefit in that, but I do see the benefit in full on sharing of intelligence, particularly if you have an adversary. And let's be honest, China is an adversary to the West. There is no doubt about that. We have different views on why that happens, but China doesn't choose to be an adversary to the West. The West has chosen it as one because they've lost the other major adversary, the Soviet Union. They haven't lost Russia as an adversary, but they did lose the Soviet Union. So, it is a fact that in the West they need to have an enemy, they need to have an adversary, they need to have a threat so that they can continue with their building of the military, the building of the military-industrial complex, the building of the technology, the building of the surveillance systems, all of those things. So I do see that there's benefit to them to have it, but it doesn't seem to me to be working the way they want to do it. And as you say, if it was designed to counter China and to hold China in place, then it's failed dismally. China is now everything they didn't want it to be, and it's too late to stop that.
Dr. Rich?
Well, my view on the Quad is that there is benefit in it, but it probably really needs to be adapted to a different sort of environment and rethought. And at some level, the whole concept of the Indo-Pacific probably really has been fashionable over the last 15 or so years within American, Australian sort of strategic circles. Probably needs to be rethought. I think it's worth saying that the origins of the Quad are actually from 2004, and it was partly a response to the tsunami that hit Indonesia, I think, from memory. But, a wide area in the South Asia and Southeast Asia. And the general accounts that are provided about it say that there was a significant concern at that time that neither China nor the United States, which had significant military presence in the area, were particularly proactive in their response to the security, the human security issues that were raised by the tsunami, but that India and Japan were much more significant. And so it was partly that crisis, if you like, that led to this building on relationships, particularly between India and Japan, that led to this idea of getting the four, I guess, big states that relate to that area that have some level of political alignment to cooperate. But it's gone through ups and downs. And I should also say that it was actually in 2004, Dr. S. Jaishankar, who's currently the External Affairs Minister, was the sort of senior official who was actually responsible for India's involvement in that. I think it was initially called the Quadrilateral Dialogue or something like that. And then it did take shape in 2007, but it was everyone said, calm down, folks, because the big concern was it was being perceived as an attempt to control China. In some senses, particularly since Trump took, was elected in 2017, he's tended to use the Quad. The China hawks in Washington have tended to, and in Canberra, have tended to use the Quad as that, whereas perhaps Japan and India, who have a very long history of cooperation, even pre-1947, were more focused on the sort of more pragmatic cooperation issues in the sort of region. And so it's sort of waxed and waned in different forms, and it probably had a high point post, pandemic, etc. Partly due to some of the health security type issues raised by all of that, supply chains and, all the rest of it. But at the moment, it is definitely in recess. It was meant to, there was meant to be a leaders' summit last year, and Narendra Modi, in the context of, America's bizarre diplomacy towards India last year, or indeed over the last couple of years, because it was not just Trump, it was also Biden. They sort of didn't they just didn't hold a leaders' summit. They never convened one. So it definitely feels like it's in abeyance, and there's a lot of talk that I've just been checking in on over the last couple of days, that it seems to be in a sort of a down cycle. And at some level, all the Quad is not an alliance. It's not an institution. It's basically, like a working group. Speaking as an ex-government official, it's like a working group. It's like these people all have some things in common. Let's get them working together. And depending on the urgency of various issues at different times, the sort of leaders may or may not get involved. And that's been the history. Like, there haven't always been leaders' summits of the Quad. At some level, it gets down to more practical cooperation between, officials and things like that. And I think, that still has benefit, because I think it is beneficial for Japan, India and Australia particularly, to be engaged in some sort of common dialogue and cooperation. But to some degree, it's been the push by America to turn it into the sort of wedge against China that I think has sort of distorted its purpose and actually undermined it. And then especially when that turned into, Trump's tariff war against the world, including Japan, India, and Australia, it started to be, who's the biggest threat to Indo-Pacific security right now? Is it China, or is it a tsunami, or is it, the tornado that's coming out of the White House? I've heard voices from India, Japan, and other places say that it probably needs to be rethought about the whole Indo-Pacific construct as well. And, there is value in some kind of multilateral cooperation, but I think it just needs to be, to me at least, it needs to be taken out of this sort of particularly intense US-China rivalry at the moment, and, look at some of the more, middle power kind of connections. And it's interesting in that regard that, Mark Carney from Canada is currently visiting Japan, India, and Australia, and I think it's in that order, over the next week or two. And as part of his sort of push to have more sort of middle power, sort of multilateral sort of coalition that tries to deal with the sort of unilateralism of the United States at the moment. So I see the Quad as, probably an institution that's sort of past its sort of use by date, but it would also be a pity to lose particularly the cooperation between Japan, India, and Australia. It perhaps just should be broadened out to some other countries in the region, Indonesia and Philippines and others as well, and find ultimately some way of saying, well, China's part of this region too, folks.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Rather than challenge.
But on the other side, we have a slightly more successful organization, BRICS. So probably would be better for these countries to join BRICS than just dismantle Quad, I guess, because BRICS has been successful. And more countries are joining BRICS. I mean, the way I see it, there are only two countries, Russia and China, who are the major contributors to BRICS, and the rest are just joining BRICS in the hope of getting economic prosperity, which will be good. I think BRICS has done some good work in Africa through China. So how do Australians view BRICS, Dr. Rich, or Australian government? How do they view BRICS?
Look, the Australian government generally seems to be very, very locked into the sort of US, we're part of the US rules-based order kind of thing. And so I don't think they think particularly constructively about BRICS. I remember I had Sam Roggeveen, who's a very interesting and creative thinker about defence strategy. He's sort of come up with this echidna strategy where a big critic of AUKUS and says, let's defend Australia rather than attack China, kind of thing. And I interviewed him on my show a while ago, and I said I'd heard this rumour that Indonesia might join the BRICS. And he said, no. And he was writing a paper at the time about how Australia could improve its relationship with Indonesia, including defence partnerships and things like that. And 9 or 12 months later, Indonesia had joined the BRICS. And I don't say that to sort of have a go at Sam, because I think Sam's a really interesting and creative and genuinely insightful thinker about all that sort of stuff. But it is perhaps also just a sign that, we're just not tuned into the Australian security world's just not tuned into these relationships that are forming in BRICS. But in some ways, I think BRICS probably, faces some of the similar challenges, if you like, of the Quad. Like, it's it needs to make sure it doesn't become an anti-Western alliance. It becomes a non-Western, or either anti-Western or an alliance. It's a multilateral forum for cooperation, and the conditions for that, genuinely pragmatic and effective cooperation will sort of, wax and wane over time. I absolutely don't think it should get to the point where the BRICS countries start to function through BRICS as a kind of rival to the United Nations. It should be, some sort of practical add-on. It was some sort of practical, beneficial add-on to that rather than substitute for the system. And given the US unilateralism and its almost open sort of defiance and virtual secession from the UN system at the moment, I think that's a real concern. So I think BRICS needs to find the right level and perhaps realise that there will be times where there's intense benefit in the cooperation, and then it might also fall away rather than it becoming like a rival NATO or a rival sort of Western alliance. I think its greatest benefit is perhaps cementing some of those sort of multilateral relationships and building a case for multilateral cooperation outside of Western dominance, but then it also needs to sort of feed into the more structured global international system through the UN.
Jerry, I'll just before you chime in, I just want to add something that recently Russia issued bonds in yuan, Chinese currency. So Russia is already trying to move away from Western payment system, and that will be really beneficial for the rest of the world to have a second financial system or payment system. BRICS Bank is becoming bigger and bigger. Loans to African countries that they need, and also building infrastructure in Africa that they actually can use rather than resource extraction. That's really beneficial to those countries. Then there is a Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well, which is sort of trying to do, Jerry would probably know more about it, but it is also trying to do the same economic prosperity thing in these countries. So I just wanted to add that, Jerry. Yeah.
Yeah, I see it a little differently to Jeff, but not far. I do agree that BRICS should never try and displace or replace the United Nations. It's not attempting to be a NATO type. It is not defensive. It doesn't. BRICS does not even have security concerns in it. The Shanghai Cooperation Agreement does. That has built-in assistance for not security but terrorism issues. National security, not defense. So it's not like a defense strategy. It's a sharing of information, and in particular with countries like Iran, which is part of these SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They do have very, very severe terrorism issues that China can't help them with. So yeah, the SCO and BRICS are very, very different. BRICS is a trading platform. It's a place where and this is the problem when you say we shouldn't try to have BRICS and the Western world as different, the global South and the global North. But the fact is the global North has made that so over the last 400 years. And BRICS is actually a response to that 400 years of exploitation. It started with slavery and it hadn't stopped until probably, still hasn't stopped, but probably until the last 20 years where many countries are starting to say, well, we no longer want this. Burkina Faso is the latest one to move away. Mali has done the same thing. Niger in Africa, they're moving away from French control, American interests, and moving into their own strategic interests and saying, we want this for our country. Now, BRICS currently takes in 55% of the world, but only 44% of the global economy. As that starts to balance out, you're going to see, whether we want this or not, you're going to see some kind of competition evolve. The competition is already there between the old order and this is becoming the new order. Now, that's where Jeff and I are in very much agreement. You can't have this replace the United Nations. It needs to be complementary too, but the United Nations needs to support the growth of all of these because BRICS is developing nations. It's not developed nations. Australia won't be part of BRICS, but New Guinea, its nearest neighbor, might be in the future. And then you're never going to have the United States as part of BRICS, nor Canada, but you might get Mexico because it's developing. And so you've got this situation where it is going to change. It's a transitory system. We are in a change of history. It's not the end of history. It's very much a transition period of history where the global South are starting to rise up, and BRICS is their vehicle. It's the vehicle that's bringing them up. China is not trying to lead it. China has always said this all the way through this. It doesn't want a leadership role. It wants all the countries to have equal roles. There was an issue there with Brazil didn't want Venezuela in BRICS, and Venezuela is not in BRICS. But then again, none of the BRICS countries stood up and said, hey, America, you can't do this to Venezuela. I mean, not in any true form. I mean, they said it, but there was no NATO-like response. So it's not defensive. It's not designed to be any form of aggression. It is merely a vehicle to build the economically underdeveloped world into an equal platform with the currently developed world. And I don't see that as being, it shouldn't be an aggressive situation. There shouldn't be any issues with this. If you want to keep people in poverty, then look at the last 400 years of history. If you want people to move up in their lives, look at what BRICS and Belt and Road, One Belt, One Road, Idailu is a very, very good thing for helping, much more so than BRICS for helping Africa. BRICS is great, but what China has done in Africa is outside of BRICS. It's more One Belt, One Road. They have just very, very recently declared basically a unilateral free trade agreement for 53 African countries. There are only 54 African countries. 53 of them recognize one China, and Beijing is the capital of it. One of them doesn't. That country, Eswatini, has no free trade agreement. So they're not doing this in a way that says, we're giving you free trade, give us free trade. They're saying, we're giving you access to our markets. You can sell anything you want, tariff-free, into China. China will buy from Africa in a big way. They're not saying we have to sell to you. So it's the opposite of what the West do, completely the opposite. They're not going to put punitive damages on anything that they don't like coming in. They've basically said to Africa, we'll take your goods. So that's a good thing. And that's what China is doing in that respect. That it's in form of leadership. It's leadership of equality, not hegemony.
It's interesting, Jerry, and I guess the insane. I think we're broadly in agreement. I guess my concern around BRICS is not necessarily so much what the BRICS states and that do, as some of the rhetoric in the the sort of commentary community, or podcaster community, I'm thinking sometimes like Pepe Escobar tends to talk about NATO stand versus, BRICS, and tends to present it as us versus them conflict. But if you think like just recently, Canada apparently has developed this sort of trade arrangement with India and Australia, which, as I understand it, I've just seen some brief reports about it, is replicating some of the BRICS strategies in non-BRICS states, which is, doing trade outside the US dollar system. And like the Australian dollar is one of the, officially recognised global reserve currencies. There's about 8 of them, that kind of thing. So I just think it's really interesting, if you like, that it's that, if you like, that model of practical, multilateral, largely economic, but some other cooperation as well, that is just rather than locking into a bifurcated sort of alliance system, which I agree with you, BRICS is not. That is, if you like, BRICS is an example, and it's been a very powerful example. And I think what we're starting to see is some of the other states, including the EU and Australia and Canada, are starting to find little spaces where they can within their realms of possibilities, where they can follow some of these sort of similar kind of strategies. So it is going to slowly change the world very, 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 very significantly, and ultimately make the sort of US unilateralism that they're so used to, outright imperialism, as in Marco Rubio's speech.
We need to do a show on that as well. That was amazing. It's as if he has no idea what happened 150 or 200 years ago in India.
It is really, I mean, that speech was really abominable. But the remarkable thing about it is the, across the political spectrum, to some degree, sort of cheering on of the story told in it in the United States. So yeah, I do feel BRICS is going to really change the world, and it's going to present issues for Australia. But I think what Australia will probably end up doing is more of that sort of, connections with Japan, connections with India, connection, which is a BRICS state, but we have a very strong people-to-people and other kind of relationships with connections with Canada, connections with other countries as well, that sort of starts to move into that space outside of it's a US or nothing kind of vision of the world. But what it will really start to present, the dilemma, big strategic dilemma, I think, for Australia over the next 20 years or so is going to be how to, like China and Russia have both openly spoken about some sort of collective security arrangement across the Eurasian continent. And, ultimately that means, and they've expressed it in terms of Eurasian security without external powers. And there's only one big external power that is, involved in Eurasia that's not in Eurasia, and that is the United States of America. And so Australia, I think, at some point is going to have to make a choice of do we engage in kind of cooperative security arrangements with the states of Eurasia and the states on the periphery of Eurasia, like Japan or Indonesia, or do we just totally remain locked into this US-focused security system? And I think that's going to be the big challenge for Australia. And I think, that will be an enormous intellectual and sort of moral challenge almost for the leadership in Australia, because they've just been so locked into the US vision of the world for so long. It's going to be hard for them to actually adapt to these new realities.
I think the problem,
and I think actually Mark Carney's visit, and Mark Carney's, you can actually see this in some of the elite commentary on Mark Carney's within Australia on Mark Carney's speech and Mark Carney's visit. They're sort of saying, "Oh, I hope he doesn't make it too hard for us with the United States. We just want to keep our head down and do what he says, what Donald says."
I think the problem is, so the countries who set the rules for the rest of the world, obviously America, China, and to some extent Russia. The rest of the world has to abide by those rules because they're not important. They don't have any power. And Australia is one of those countries. So it's a big country. Population is small. Doesn't really produce much in terms of GDP. Doesn't really contribute much. So it will do what America tells it to do. That's my take, I guess. Unless it completely shifts its position and aligns itself with China. Because again, like we discussed last time, China has shown the world that there is an alternative way to prosper, not through wars or not through military bases, but through trade and technology. And that mindset requires, I don't know how many generations, I guess, but it's not going to come in a span of 5, 10, 20 years. Because like you mentioned, Dr. Rich, Australia is locked in with America. Militarism, all that kind of stuff. So how do you, I mean, if that's the way Australia wants to go, okay, good. But if it wants to divest from that and go with China, then it will take a lot of time, I guess.
This is where I think Carney's, both his speech and his initiatives are significant. I mean, he's clearly a smart cookie. He's run 2 reserve banks in 2 different countries. So, regardless of what one might think of his particular set of ideas, he has great capability. You can't run a reserve bank without having significant executive capability. But I think it's an example of how, and I think that you can see this also over time with the UN system as well, that there are, it's not just the top 2 to 3 powers in the international system who have a say over its formation and creation. Obviously, those dominant powers do have a significant role. But the world's, don't think is developing into a new world of great powers where it's all controlled by 3, 4, 5 states. There's this great book, Once and Future World Order, by the international relations scholar Amitav Acharya, who talks about what he calls a multiplex system, where, on different issues in different situations, different countries play significant leadership roles. So leadership is going to be dispersed, and the broader distribution of resources and networks and all that sort of stuff around the world just mean leadership is dispersed. Like Canada can play a leadership role on certain issues. India can play a leadership role on certain issues. And when even the formation of the United Nations Charter itself back in 1945, it wasn't just written by a bunch of Americans and Brits. It was actually significantly shaped by some of the less powerful countries in the world in quite decisive ways as well. And over the course of time, we've seen that play out. At times Mexico's played a significant role in sort of shaping different ideas, and a range of different countries have played significant leadership roles. So I really don't think it is such a command and control sort of thing between, vassals and one or two great states. I think the system is much more open than that, and especially with the change in flows of resources and trade and ideas and migration and all the rest of it around the world, it's a much more dynamic and sort of chaotic system than the traditional sort of models of international relations, which are all about hegemons and challenges and all that sort of thing. So to me, that's the optimistic side of it. As long as one can, sort of put the United States in a padded cell somewhere while they get over their sort of psychotic episode
800
of,
military bases.
imperial delusions. The world will be okay. It will find a new balance, and then after a couple of weeks rest or whatever, the United States can come back into the world system and sort of slowly recover its sort of sanity.
Jerry, what's your take on what Dr. Rich said?
I'm actually very much in agreement, but I think it'll take the US a little more than a couple of weeks to get over it.
Metaphorically, a couple of weeks.
It's not like they need to be put into a padded cell, but they certainly need treatment. And I actually wrote this an article probably 2 years ago. Is the US on the verge of a nervous breakdown? So it fitted very, very nicely with what you just said. And I think probably one of the things that Jeff referred to there, the Eurasian Economic Union, is one of the most underrated in the world in terms of geopolitics, in terms of global stability. Eurasian Economic Union, which actually includes as a free trade partner Iran. So Iran, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, these are former Soviet Union satellite countries, which are, and Russia is part of it. It's a huge free trade agreement. It's like the economic union, the European Economic Union of years ago. It's a free trade agreement between these 5 countries, and China is a partner to it. China's actually hosted the Eurasian Economic Union annual meeting a couple of years ago in Xi'an. I was in the city at the same time by coincidence. I wasn't attending the meeting, but gosh, the security was pretty tight around the city. So yeah, I was there watching that, and it was only then that I realized just how important that particular region is to China and to Russia, because it is resource rich. It is hugely resource laden, and that is the future. Now, these countries, people in America have never heard of these countries. They wouldn't be able to pinpoint Eurasia on a map, let alone Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan's huge. It's massive. It's a big country with a lot of people, and it's got a lot of wealth under the ground, mostly. So these are countries that I think we're going to start seeing grow in their importance in terms of economics, not in terms of defense or security. Security is a big issue. And one of the reasons why the US certainly would love to see Xinjiang destabilized is because almost everything that leaves China goes through that region, Xinjiang, and then into Xinjiang is part of the Eurasian economic region, not the union, but the region. And it's very much, I mean, you go into Xinjiang and you can find people who speak Kazakh. You can find people who, in fact, there's more people speaking Kazakh than there are in Kazakhstan, where they speak mostly Russian. So you've got a lot of people in that area who are Kyrgyz, Tajiks, Kazakhs inside of China. They are Chinese citizens, Chinese people, Chinese passport holders, but they're speaking the language of the Eurasian economic area. So there's a lot of stability needed for that area. Russia and China providing it. America say they're providing security and safety and things like that, but not necessarily always the way that would agree. So I see that as being a very important factor in the future. And Australia does. I mean, very much along the lines of Australia does need to listen to what Mark Carney has to say. He's a globalist. He has done reserve banking. He knows what he's talking about in terms of global hegemony, in terms of global security, in terms of global finance and economy. He knows what he's talking about. And when he comes to Australia, it's a good time to say, well, we're not minor powers. We're middle powers. Australia and Canada are very similar in population. Canada's bigger in size, but you get there's lots of open spaces. There's lots of resources in both countries. And there's only 25 to 30 million people in each of those countries. They have a great contribution to the world, to the economy of the world with their resources. They both have a great contribution to the world in terms of the fact they're both very developed nations and they both got good leadership. I have to be honest, I'm disappointed with Albanese, but effectively they have a good system of leadership. And Carney is showing the world that he's got some mettle. He's standing up. And he's not aligned with China, but he said to China, we need you and you need us. We can work together. And that is good. Merz is doing the same thing for Germany. Macron does the same thing for France. The European Union wants to work with China. The UK wants to work with China. Australia seems to be keeping China at arm's length and saying, yeah, maybe not just yet. But we keep buying our gear, keep buying it, and we'll keep buying stuff from you, but we'll go to America for our security. And there's something needs to break there. One of those two things has to break. You can't rely on one country for your entire income and expenditure, which they do, and then rely on another country that is adversarial to that country for securing you against that country. Something is very wrong. So yeah, it needs to change. And I think Carney can help. I hope.
Well, let's hope. So he's coming here next week, a week after next. Is that it, Dr. Rich? Okay.
Yeah, I think next week.
Let's see what comes
I
out.
think he's in India like today and next few days.
Modi's in Israel today, isn't he?
I think, yeah, but I think Carney is now in India and he's meeting with Modi in a couple of days.
Okay.
And, and that in itself is, I mean, because the relationship between Canada and India was extremely poisoned by, the sort of combined, American, Canadian, British, even, sort of covert sort of efforts to sort of, or reasonably overt efforts at times to, defeat Modi in the 2024 election. And various efforts in the region, and the issues to do with the Khalistan sort of
the Sikhs,
groups, etc. As well. So that in itself is. There's the opening there to China, there's the opening there to India as well, and both of which are Canada sort of stepping back from being in a lockstep with the United States. And if Canada can do that, given its economic dependence and its immediate, it being a physical neighbour of the United States of America, then surely Australia can do it. But the commentary I've seen from some of the sort of establishment security people is, we really worry that the public are not locked in behind the US alliance, and there's been this cataclysmic fall in support or trust in America, and that was measurable in June last year. It will be even worse when it's measured again in June this year. And somehow or other, we've got to convince them that we really need to sort of spend more on defence and sort of lock in harder behind the US alliance, even though everyone around the world is saying, let's not do that. Let's hedge our bets. So it's going to be fascinating to see how the US, how the Australian sort of leadership groups really respond to that. And I think they'll probably be, like the last, loyal people going down with the US ship. But I might hopefully I'm wrong.
Yeah, the biggest problem Australia has right now is if it does fully align itself militarily, and it seems it's going that direction with America, then China is just going to say, well, we're not going to fund that anymore. We'll get our iron ore from somewhere else. We'll get our coal from somewhere else. We'll get our natural gas from somewhere else. And they have alternatives for all of this now. Yep. In terms of iron ore, that's the big one. It's like 70% of Australia's exports, and about 60% of that comes to China. So it's a huge factor. We're talking a huge amount of Australia's economy is reliant on one customer. And that is a very dangerous position to be in when your security provider is saying, we don't want you doing business with that customer.
Yeah.
And in China hasn't really made this decision yet. And it could. China could literally ruin Australia tomorrow if it chose to, just by simply saying, well, we're not going to buy any more iron ore from you. We're going to get it. They can't get enough out of West Africa, not yet. They can only get 150 million tons. They need 700 million tons a year. They're getting 600 million tons from Australia. They can reduce that. They haven't. They can. And if they do, that's going to hurt Australia very, very, very badly. So why would China continue to fund AUKUS, which is effectively an attack fleet against China? Why would they fund that? So people in China must be asking themselves this question at very high level. I'm not talking about people like me. I'm talking about right up there in the Politburo. They must be asking this question already. And Australia needs to, and it's had several opportunities, and Albanese's had 2 elections, and he's still not convinced China. He hasn't convinced me anyway, and I'm in China. He hasn't convinced people in China that Australia is a good trading partner to keep.
Yeah, I think the first one to go will be the coal export to China because of China's advancement in thorium nuclear reactors and various renewable energy technologies.
But China's still buying a lot of coal, but it only imports 2% of its needs.
Yeah.
So Australia is about 2% of that. It's tiny. Yeah. It's big for Australia, but it's very tiny for China. They could stop that tomorrow.
The other way is China telling its citizens not to go to Australia for study. I mean, Australian universities, they take a lot of Chinese students, and Chinese students are really good. So, I mean, if China gives that order, I mean, Australian university will struggle really badly.
China doesn't give those kinds of orders, and it recognizes that Australian universities are good too. So good students from here going to good universities over there, it's good for both countries. Yep. It should be, until organizations like ASPI write articles that say they're all spies, which has happened.
I'm still waiting for the evidence of secret police.
Me too.
Maybe just one last comment on that, Ali, is, I do think China, it's not really my place to dispense advice to China, but I think, this is where, I don't know, patience and goodwill or something is perhaps in a good thing, because the remarkable thing about what the United States has done is if if it were just forcing Australia to have this sort of rethink and force its elites, if you like, to go against broad public sentiment of starting a war with China, it would be pretty bad for Australia, because I mean, in those circumstances, I would have thought China would absolutely sort of put the pressure on, and Australia would not be able to cope. But the fact is, the United States has also annoyed India and Japan and Europe, Africa, every other country in Asia. And that might be the sort of out, if you like, that the political class, at least, even if it involves going against the sort of security establishment in Australia, might ultimately need to do, that we really do need to just hedge our bets here. And if India and Canada and even the EU can do that a little bit, then perhaps we ought to maybe just hedge our bets a little bit as well, and get out of our sort of lockstep arrangement. But I don't think it's I think it will be driven by external events rather than, if you like, by a leadership choice.
Unfortunately, I agree with that.
Yep, that's true. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, both of you, for taking the time to talk to me. It's a very insightful conversation, different viewpoints. But I hope I'm learning a lot. I hope my 30, 40 viewers learn a lot as well. Let's see how that goes.
Well, let's get them up.
Yeah.
And let's see. So Jerry put the video up on his channel. It got like 5,000 views and like 100 something comments. That was great, actually. That was great engagement. Okay, thank you very much. I'll stop recording now.